This is a brief history of recoilless air pistols and their development from the 1960s through to the 1980s. Up until the 1960s, most air pistols used for target shooting used a spring-powered piston, with all their associated problems of recoil. To use these, you first have to compress a spring that holds back a piston in an air cylinder. When you fire it, the spring expands and the piston pushes all of the air out of the cylinder until it hits the end. As the spring expands, it pushes the pistol backwards, and then the piston hitting the end of the cylinder pushes the pistol forwards. This double recoil causes the pistol to move while the pellet is still travelling down the barrel, making it difficult to get consistent accuracy. Before the invention of modern PCP match pistols, a couple of airgun manufacturers developed some interesting mechanisms to try to eliminate recoil in spring-powered air pistols. The two most successful ones were developed by Diana and Feinwerkbau. In 1960, the German airgun manufacturer Diana introduced a Model 6 air pistol. This particular one is a cutaway model from the Diana showroom in Rastatt. The Model 6 uses their patented giss Contra piston counter-recoil system, in which a dummy piston of the same weight as the real one travels in the opposite direction. They both get to the end of travel at exactly the same moment and cancel each other out, so there isn't any recoil. These two pistons are connected by a rack and pinion linkage, so when you compress the main piston spring, the dummy piston spring is compressed by the same amount, and they fire at the same time. It really is a beautifully engineered mechanism. There were several variations of the Model 6 over the years. The last one was this, the Model 10, which came out in 1975. This particular one was made in 1980. It uses the same giss Contra piston system as the Model 6, but it has more of a target pistol layout. The Model 10 has anatomical grips, a rotating barrel shroud that protects your hand from the foresight when you're cocking it, and a fully adjustable match trigger. It's a very interesting pistol to shoot. You can feel the crack of the action when you fire it, but the pistol stays completely still. Consequently, it's very accurate, although it is a little bit heavy. But in the world of 10-metre match pistols, Diana lost out to another German airgun manufacturer, Feinwerkbau, and to possibly the most famous recoilless spring pistol, the Feinwerkbau 65. As the name suggests, it was first produced in 1965, and it uses Feinwerkbau's patented sledge system. This is where the entire mechanism slides back on rails, independent of the trigger mechanism. The pistol action still recoils, but it's isolated from the shooter, and it does it in exactly the same way every time. It's more accurately described as a recoil management system, and when you fire it, the pistol doesn't seem to move, and it's extremely accurate. The Feinwerkbau 65 had a fixed barrel, and it was over 200 grams lighter than the Model 10. The anatomical grips were more refined, and it was easier to service than the Model 10 with its complicated giss system. With the LP65, Feinwerkbau were onto a real winner. "10-metre air pistol shooting became an Olympic sport in 1966, and the Feinwerkbau 65 and its derivatives dominated the sport all the way through to the 1980s, at both Olympic and club level. There were three evolutions of the 65 over the years. In 1973, they introduced the Feinwerkbau 80, which had an adjustable trigger, and in 1982 they introduced a Feinwerkbau 90, which had an electronic trigger. This is a Feinwerkbau 90 from 1983. It was the first ever production airgun to have an electronic trigger. All of the circuitry is housed in a pistol grip frame. The trigger presses a button. This activates a solenoid which releases the sear. It's light and very predictable. It also has the added advantage that you can dry fire it, which means you can practice your trigger technique at home without firing a pellet. This is extremely useful for training. The Feinwerkbau 90 really marked the pinnacle of spring-powered target pistol design. Up until this point, single-stroke pneumatic air pistols were also being developed, but they suffered from a low power output and high cocking effort when compared to spring pistols. However, all of that was about to change. In 1983, the Italian company Pardini introduced the Pardini Fiocchi P10. This was a single-stroke pneumatic air pistol with a long underlever cocking arm and an automatic pop-up loading port. It was still a bit low on power, but it was an innovative design that inspired the next generation of target pistols. 1988 saw the introduction of the Feinwerkbau 100. Similar in design to the Pardini P10, but powerful enough to compete at the top level. This is actually a 1988 model. It doesn't have a spring or a piston, but simply compresses the air in a chamber and releases it when you pull the trigger, so there is virtually no recoil. The large air cylinder and long cocking arm means it can produce a muzzle velocity of 490 feet per second. With fewer moving parts, it's significantly lighter than the Feinwerkbau 90, which makes it much easier to shoot. The anatomical grip has a steeper angle and the sightline is lower, so it feels very similar to a modern PCP pistol. Except you have to compress the air for each shot. It has a fully adjustable match trigger which can be set for dry firing, which is important for training. This design inspired the Walther LPM1, the Baikal MP46 and the Pardini K48. The Feinwerkbau 100 really is an excellent pistol, which is every bit as accurate as many modern PCP match pistols. However, the effort required to cock it over the course of a 60-shot match could cause fatigue and would inevitably raise the heart rate of the shooter, which is not ideal. So, pretty soon, manufacturers were developing pistols that could hold a pre-charge of CO2 or compressed air for multiple shots and do away with the need to cock them repeatedly. Incidentally, some of the best modern PCP match pistols are still made by Feinwerkbau to this day. I really like these air pistols. I'm fascinated by the ingenuity, lateral thinking and engineering that went into designing and producing them. They are a real pleasure to shoot and enjoyable to learn about. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more.